joining us today, and thank you, Senator Sinema. We have a lot to talk about.
We do.
We're going to try to get through as much as possible. We obviously are at the McCain Institute's Sedona Forum, named for the late Senator John McCain. His last act in the public arena, the historic thumbs down on the GOP's skinny repeal bill, it crossed party lines and it cemented his reputation as a maverick. Here we are, just a few 7 years later. You've notably said that you are leaving the Senate because Americans don't want the collaborative approach that you've said you modeled, in part, after him, by crossing party lines. Why do you think that that approach has been devalued in such a short amount of time?
Well, Yvonne, you know this. I've been kind of talking about this for 20 years now, and the real privilege I've had to serve Arizona from my time in the state house and the state senate with some of my former colleagues right here, to later serving in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate with some of my colleagues who are here. And literally for the last 20 years, I've been telling anyone who would listen why it was so important to ignore partisan boundaries and just seek solutions, common sense solutions that serve the interests of the people that we serve in Arizona and across the country. But it has become increasingly clear, I think everyone in the room would surely agree, that that style has become more out of favor. Now, I won't say that it was in favor at any time in the last 20 years specifically, but it's become more out of favor. It's become less acceptable to work in a way that is not concerned about the next election or who's going to win one over the other guy, but more concerned about actually solving a problem that the American people face. And I think there are a lot of reasons for it. Certainly, the influence of money and media in politics has a lot to do with it. But ultimately, I think the responsibility lies with all of us as Americans. It is our choice who we vote for. It's our choice who we nominate. It's our choice who we support in electoral politics. And when we've gotten to a place where it's unusual, if not heretical, to support someone with whom you don't agree 100%, you're in a tough spot. Because what that means is that those who want to survive in the system, who want to continue to be elected and continue serving, have to agree with the base 100%. You've heard me say this before. Notably, I said this during my Senate campaign just 6 years ago. I've always said, if you ever meet someone with whom you agree 100%, either they're a liar or you're not thinking for yourself. And both of those are very, very dangerous for American democracy. And so I guess my challenge, kind of this is my opening challenge, I'm not sure it's a challenge for those who are in the room, but perhaps for our friends and our neighbors and our colleagues who may not share the same commitment that you all in this room share to a diversity of ideas and compromise. The challenge I would offer is to support people with whom you only agree with about 60% of the time. Because that means he or she is thinking for themselves. And they're doing something a little bit outside of what the party machine is telling them to do. And it means that they're looking for real solutions and are willing to compromise, not on values, but on specific tactics or strategies or even items in order to get that solution. That's become unpopular, but I think we could make it popular again.
So one of the elements that you talk about is the party system. McCain, again, memorably challenged his party on things like immigration reform, on things like torture. He was ridiculed here at home and more broadly, nationally. He was censured here by the state Republican Party for it.
Who hasn't been censured? Come on.
Right, those in the audience. But he never left the GOP. In fact, at times, as a result of this, as he saw the fringes of his party become more extreme, he engaged and recruited precinct committee people and officials to serve in key positions at the party. By contrast, you quit the Democratic Party. You didn't really engage with the party at the grassroots level like he did. Some people wanted you to stay in the Democratic Party as perhaps a moderating force, to try to handle some of the extremism, as you call it, that we see on the left. Why didn't you do that?
Well, it's my assessment that both of the mainstream political parties in our country today have become less tolerant of difference of opinion within their own tent, right? So the idea of the big tent is not very big anymore. It's pretty small and exclusive. And unfortunately, the smaller and more exclusive that tent becomes, the less likely it is that folks with independent thought or willingness to compromise fit. And so for me, declaring my independence from a political party was the right move. Some of the folks who are in this room who've known me for a very long time know that before I was a member of the Democratic Party, I was an independent. And in fact, as I ran for office time and time again in Arizona, regardless of what the label at the end of my name was, I always campaigned and governed as an independent. I was taught at a very young age to think for myself, and that the fierceness of independent thought, of using your own brain to ask questions and be thoughtful and be slow to come to a conclusion, but firm in your beliefs when you do, that could fit in a political party, but doesn't fit very well today. And so it became clear that the party that I was affiliated with wasn't really interested in having my voice as part of the tent, which is fine. And so, I exited stage left. Actually, I exited stage center. But for me, it was actually a really important moment because it was an opportunity for me to remind not just myself, but my state, my constituents, and the country who I have always been, which is an independent voice for what I believe in.
At what point did you become pretty fatalistic about the Democratic Party? We know that you didn't ever really feel like a member, and that didn't define you, that label didn't define you.
That's
but
right.
At what point were you just like, I can't do this anymore?
I don't know that fatalistic is the right word, because I do have hope for both the Democratic and Republican Party. And for those who are in the audience today who still remain members of those parties, I would strongly encourage them to try and do some rehab. If you want to. If not, my party is fabulous. And you can believe whatever you want in my party. It's great. So fatalistic's not the right word, but I will say that it has been a growing concern of mine over the years. And it became particularly strong as I served in the United States Senate. As folks here are no doubt familiar, there was a time in the United States Senate where my vote and my voice became very pivotal. Partly because of the numbers, right, within the body, but I would argue more so because I chose to use the position to advance the things I believed in. When you serve in a 50-50 Senate, and to a slightly lesser extent, a 51-49 Senate, every single vote counts. And I would say to my colleagues during the time of the 50-50, when, as you'll recall, I was negotiating bipartisan after bipartisan after bipartisan package, from the bipartisan infrastructure law with my friend Mitt Romney right there, to the Marriage and Religious Freedom Act, which I also negotiated with Mitt, to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which Mitt was, I'm just gonna keep talking about Mitt. Mitt was a part of every single one of these efforts. CHIPS and science, the list goes on. And there were people who, in my former party, who would come to me and say, why? Why are you doing this? And I said, well, first, I can. This is the time. We can get so much done. And the second thing I would say is, we are all one of 50, each of us. It's just that I was willing to take the arrows for being the one who said, I am not going to go along with the herd. I want to do this because it is the right thing for my state and for my country, and I'm going to do it even if some folks are unhappy with it.
Okay, so we're going to get to some of those things, and we're going to get to the great senator from Utah here in a minute. But
he can just come on up here. No?
Let's talk, though, a little bit about your personal experience, your path in politics, because it does, in so many ways, as I was preparing for this interview, it very much reflects sort of this the parallels of modern American politics, right? You enter as this bomb-throwing, liberal backbencher, in the Arizona legislature. And then you realize that, look, this is just not working.
It was
I'm going to
horrible.
learn, I'm going to adapt, I'm going to grow. You emerge as a deal maker at the state house. You are negotiating with some of the toughest Republican, far-right cast of characters of the time. You are catapulted into the U.S. House, and then eventually...
It did not feel like a catapult. It felt like a very, very difficult rock climb.
You won
with no safety.
And became a member of Congress. And then you became a member of the Senate in a very historic election. You became the first woman to do so, the first Democrat in 30 years. It was a big deal for a state like Arizona. You obviously are leaving the Senate with a virtually unparalleled record as a bipartisan negotiator who helped shape some of the most consequential pieces of legislation during your tenure with the help of the gentleman in the audience. You are at the pinnacle of American power with the experience and the skills to govern. And now voters here at home don't want that approach. That must be super hard to reconcile for someone like you.
I mean, it's disappointing, yeah.
How are you working through that?
Well, I mean, the good news is I go through the 5 stages of grief very quickly. Look, we're at a fever in our country right now. And everyone in the room who's a parent knows that when your child has a fever, it's very scary. There are limited things that you can do to help your child. Mostly it's to try and alleviate the pain and help them feel like it's going to be okay. And then you wait for the fever to break. And that's, I think, where we are. We've got to wait for this fever to break. Now, there are things that we can do to help alleviate the pain and make it get through this faster. But that takes a collective effort of Americans who, again, going back to my comments at the beginning, we as Americans have to be willing to support and choose that, which isn't 100% in line with every one of our emotional beliefs. We've got to learn to tolerate difference, and in fact, to celebrate difference. So I look forward to that time when that happens again in American politics. We are not in that time right now. We are in a time where the voters have said pretty clearly, and we see this not just in Arizona, but we see it at the national level, and we see it in state after state. Voters are mostly interested in choosing the person who says what they agree with the loudest. And there isn't much of a connection between delivering the results. In fact, my experience was, of course, in the list of all these bipartisan achievements, my experience was that while there were some people who were very excited to see the real difference that those laws have made in the lives of Arizonans, what I heard a lot of are people who were just unhappy that it wasn't enough of what they wanted. And, you know, we live in an instant media world, but we don't live in an instant work product world. It still takes time and effort to do work, and it also requires negotiation and compromise.
So you're casting this as much as a cultural phenomenon and problem as political. That's what it is,
it is.
Right?
This is a cultural issue.
How do you break that fever?
Yeah.
How do you do that? And how long will it take? Is it a generational thing? I go talk to voters all the time. I come back from far-flung parts of this state and others, and it very much seems like it will be the next generations from now.
Yeah.
It's not going to be anytime soon.
I don't know. You know, I can't read the future. I have been talking about this for 20 years, so maybe I've just been seeing it coming. But like what you hear from voters is also what I have been hearing, and that is that by and large, what many Americans want is to have someone tell them exactly what it is that they want to hear. And more folks are interested in a strategy of by any means necessary, or this kind of concept that the ends do justify the means. Of course, we've had that debate over and over in the Senate, most recently, of course, with the filibuster debate. I just fundamentally, I don't accept it. I fundamentally do not accept that the ends justify the means. I do not accept that. Because I believe that when you do accept that you're accepting a way of interacting with each other as humans that degrades and erodes our individuality, our respect for each other, and our desire for shared outcomes for the common good. So I reject it. When will the rest of the country choose that? I have no idea. No idea. But I do think we're in for a bit of a rough time.
There are many people in this room who, and outside, I mean, across America, who bemoan the states of their parties and very much believe that the parties need to burn down before it can be fixed, before the fever breaks. Do you share that school of thought? That it just has to reach rock bottom?
I don't know that it has to, but as a student of history, I would note that things often do go through periods of darkness before we get to periods of light. That is true of American and world history. So I'm not sure I can answer that fully because I just don't know. And I don't lie, so I'm not going to pretend to know.
When you announced that you were not running, that you would be resigning rather than running for re-election, you said that American voters no longer wanted their politicians to compromise or to find solutions. Take us back to that moment when you first realized that, or a series of moments that it seems very much like watching you from afar. It was like a slow-moving sort of realization that this is where it likely would end up.
I don't know that I can give you a moment or even a series of moments, but what I can say is that in the 20 years that I have been incredibly honored and privileged to serve Arizona, it has gotten harder each year. It got harder and harder to find folks who are willing to compromise, who are willing to put aside the thing, right? The thing, whatever the thing was. It has become more difficult for folks to find folks who are willing to put aside this one thing in order to get to the larger goal. It is still not impossible. I mean, Mitt and others who I serve with in the Senate will tell you that even still today, I continue to go to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to try and convince them to just at least cooperate on the very smallest of items so we can do the very basics of government. But I will tell you that even that has become more difficult, much, much more difficult.
What's the response? On the smallest of items, what do your colleagues come back and say?
Well, they have this thing that they want. And some of them have said to me, but Kirsten, I will never have an opportunity to talk about this thing that I want if I don't do it here. And so part of what I have done is to try and brainstorm ways to help address their need without, burning down the Senate. And so I spend a lot of my time trying to help meet my colleagues' concerns and needs, all of which are valid. I want to be clear, whether I agree with them or not. People aren't showing up and asking to do something that's insane. They're showing up and asking for something that they believe in. And it just so happens that, a lot of other people in the Senate believe the opposite. And as you know, in the Senate, it takes 100 senators to come to consensus to move forward on pretty much anything. And so what I spend a lot of my time doing is seeking to help address that one person's need and figuring out how can I address that need in a way that doesn't cause us to, default or shut down or not pass an important piece of legislation to support Ukraine, et cetera. I spend a lot of my time and energy doing that. And what I have found is that individually, when someone feels like they're being heard and respected and helped, they're much more willing to be cooperative. And that's how I've been able to kind of make that progress. But it's getting harder.
So let's talk about one of those really hard moments, a recent moment. You helped put together a border security bill that contained elements that Republicans had largely been advocating for over the past 20 years. But because of presidential election politics, Republicans decided that it would be better to walk away from addressing security problems rather than to fix them. How did that change your opinion of your colleagues?
I don't think it changed anything. First of all, I'm incredibly proud of that package. It represented the most comprehensive, strictest, most forceful, and effective border security measures that we've seen in our country in over a generation. It was a really good package. There were a couple parts in it I didn't love, but again, compromise. So I was very proud of the package. We worked very, very hard on it for 5 months. And I worked very closely with a number of my colleagues in both parties to ensure that we were listening to folks' concerns, that we were incorporating what they needed. I spent an inordinate amount of time telling Chuck Schumer and the White House that once again, they needed to eat their disappointment and do this next thing. I did that for 5 months in a row. And I'm really proud of the package that we presented, but I also knew within 6 hours of it becoming public that it was going to be dead.
How did you know?
Well, you could hear it. You could hear it. Before I went to bed Sunday night, I could hear it.
How did you went to bed Sunday night? Did you sleep? Like, what did that feel like?
Oh, yeah, I slept. Yeah, I slept. Disappointing. I would say disappointing on 2 fronts. One, first and foremost, disappointing for my state, right? Like, Arizona has been eating the brunt of the failure to address our border crisis for the last 40 years. And, you know, I was born and raised in Tucson. I know what this is like. I know how this has devastated our border communities. I also know what it is like through my interaction with migrants for folks who are being told that they're coming to a promised land and are going to get a path to citizenship, and there is no path at all for these individuals, none. They will live in the shadows until such time they are deported or for the rest of their lives. So this is not fair to them either. It is just it's a humanitarian and security crisis. So first and foremost, I was very, very upset for my state. And then secondly, I was disappointed in the politics.
Did you feel, after all of this hard work, all the back and forth, the months of negotiations, did you feel on any level betrayed by your colleagues?
No, I don't think that's a helpful word.
What word would you use, other than disappointed?
That's the word. The reason I wouldn't say betrayal is because betrayal would imply that there was some sort of contract or understanding, and there wasn't. There was just, look, I think a majority of senators, more than 60 senators, wanted to vote yes on that package. Just not more than they wanted to survive.
Well, yeah, and what did it tell you about that moment for democracy, that it was better for them politically to walk away from this than it was to fix it?
Well, I mean, this is not a new story, right? John was in multiple gangs of 8 trying to fix immigration. And his gangs were comprehensive. So they actually solved citizenship issues too. Ours was pretty much just border. A little bit of visas, but mostly just border. And so the story of an unwillingness to do the big, hard thing in front of you because of the short-term political repercussions is not a new story. And it's not just a border story. It is also the story that our country is facing when it comes to solving the crisis of dealing with shortfalls in Social Security and Medicare. It is also the crisis we are dealing with a looming debt that will soon become overwhelming. I mean, it's not a unique story. It's just the loud one right now. But those other stories are just as dangerous for our country.
It seemed as though by the time this border package falls apart, all signs were pretty much pointing towards you not mounting a re-election campaign, but it also sort of seemed like maybe this could springboard you into the race. How did this play into your decision to run or not, or did it?
No.
It felt like a final sort of indignity. That's what it looked like.
I don't know. I don't know what.
You're going to quibble with the word?
Yeah, that's not my word.
Okay.
I'm very precise, as you know. I just, I'm serving in the world's greatest deliberative body, and it has been an incredible privilege. And there are days, many of them now, where you go to work and think, they're not particularly interested in solving problems. And those in this room who've known me for many years know that what I love most is to solve problems. I love getting a tough problem, bringing disparate groups together, helping them understand and care about each other's perspective, and helping them reach a solution. And I'm not personally attached much to what the solution is. What I'm interested in is getting to that solution, to making it better for the community that we serve. And I loved serving in the Senate during the time when I was able to do that over and over and over again. And I am not interested in not doing that with my time.
So you're going to tell us what you're going to do next?
As soon as I know, and to be clear, I have no idea. But I'm excited about a future where I will work to solve problems for people who want solutions. I'm really looking forward to that.
It's become quite common today for elected officials of either major party to privately express concerns about the extremism, as they put it, in their own parties, but very few are openly willing to attack it or confront it head on. Obviously, McCain did.
I understand why.
Right. A lot of them talk about it in private. And Senator Romney, in his book, dished quite a bit about some of the things that his colleagues say privately but will not say publicly. What are your colleagues telling you without naming names?
Well, he and I have the same colleagues, so.
But I presume you may be willing to share conversations with your conversations. What are you listening to? And what are you telling them?
Well, this will come as no surprise to anyone in the room. I say what I think. Not everyone loves it. So when some of my colleagues have come to me and said, oh, we're so sad you're leaving, and you're so valuable, and we're going to miss you, and how are we ever going to get anything done? I say, you know, it would have been awesome if you had said any of those things at all out loud over the last 5 years. But, you know, tittles. Look, there is a tendency to let someone else take the arrows, and I have always been fine taking them, because I believe that you should stand on the courage of your convictions, and you should be open and honest and direct about who you are and what you believe. And if there are those who don't like it, then let the chips fall where they may. The one person in my life who was the best example for that was John McCain. He said what he thought, and he let the chips fall where they may. And sometimes those chips fell all around his feet, and he just kept going. I admire that. But not everyone is comfortable with that. So I do believe that everyone, all of us as humans, are always doing the best we can every day. And so that is what I remind myself if I begin to feel frustrated or disappointed.
But what do your colleagues tell you?
Some people are glad that I've been willing to take arrows.
What else?
I don't really want to tell you anything else. I'm also not going to write a tell-all book. Nope, sorry.
It's a shame. Many of the biggest pieces of legislation you helped pass, including the infrastructure law, were also pushed by the Biden administration. President Biden has frequently said that he wants lawmakers to work together, to compromise in the same spirit that you are talking about, and one embodied by Senator McCain. Do you think the president is practicing the same sort of politics that he preaches?
I think the White House has kind of two sides, right? And I don't mean this in a negative way, just observant. I think that, you know, the folks who get things done understand that bipartisanship is the best way to get things done. And they are happy to support it when such an opportunity is available. But there is also a part that is very interested in the next election.
Do you think that President Biden has brought America together and helped sort of lower the temperature post-Trump, or has he, on the other hand, in some ways sort of fallen into some of the same partisan patterns that sometimes drive people apart?
I think the partisans are partisans.
Do you want to elaborate?
Well, I mean, Biden and Trump say partisan things. That is what they do.
Do you think the American electorate recognizes that as it pertains to the Biden administration?
I think the American electorate is pretty partisan.
People increasingly say they are disillusioned with that partisanship in both
Yes.
parties, obviously. But at the same time, efforts to create a different path have fallen flat. Is it even possible, do you think, to make a difference outside of the two-party system in the short term?
Well, I did try that experiment.
Right, hence the question.
I would offer no.
For
I mean,
anyone?
it didn't work. Well, maybe someone more talented than me.
Or outside of Arizona, or,
I don't know.
we face unique
Yeah, I can't
elements,
answer that.
obviously.
I can tell you that I tried an experiment and it wasn't as successful as I would hoped it would have been.
What happens in Arizona typically is replicated elsewhere, outside
Yes.
of the state. Right now, we are at the center of some of the most divisive issues of our era. We have the border issue. We have election denialism that is reached a fever peak and is likely only going to get worse. We have the fight over abortion access. We have the fight over long-term natural resources like water. Everywhere you look in this state, there seems to be chaos and crisis. Arizona is, in so many ways, the frontier of American democracy. And why do you think that is, and what is the way out for this state?
I think one of the reasons why Arizona often is seen as kind of a bellwether, right, or canary in the coal mine, so to speak, is that Arizona has a very long history of independence, right? People think what they think in Arizona. And unlike in other states, we don't really feel the need to lie about it. We just say it. I appreciate that. It's kind of a little bit of shock, actually, when you go other places and you realize not everyone just says what they think to your face. And you have to figure out how to decode it. Because here, people just say exactly what they think. And I really appreciate that, because then you know exactly what you're dealing with. What's unfortunate, I think, is the polarization that we've seen in both parties. You know, it wasn't this polarized a decade ago. When I was serving in the state legislature, actually my friend and former colleague, Kirk Adams, is here. He was the Speaker of the House, and I was, I don't know, I had some title of leadership.
You were a minority leader, weren't you?
I wasn't the minority leader. I was the shadow minority, probably. Someone else had the title, but yeah, I did the work. Kirk and I were often on other sides of an issue nominally, right? But the friendship and relationship that we had and the ability we had to work together, the agreements that we would make about how to move forward were wonderful. I mean, wonderful. We would stand together at the back of the floor session and actually have conversations about, what are we going to do next, et cetera. And it wasn't like we were bargaining. It's that we were having adult, rational conversations about how to solve specific problems and move forward. And let me say, I have that relationship for which I'm very grateful with both Mitch McConnell and the two men who are running to replace him, John Thune and John Cornyn. They're wonderful, delightful men to work with. But the conferences aren't quite the same anymore. And so there's this contrarianism for contrarianism's sake sometimes, it feels like, that has complicated things. And I think the advent of media and money have, as I mentioned earlier, have influenced that because, folks want to be a TikTok star and raise money on the internet because they gave a speech or something like that. And that has gotten worse. And I think that has helped push Arizonans and Americans farther to these partisan corners. Again, I know it's a circular conversation, but to come back on how to solve that, this is a cultural issue. You can't legislate your way out of this. This is about us as Americans choosing to think critically and treat our fellow man differently, maybe with respect and curiosity, rather than with skepticism and hatred. But that takes time.
I have a few questions left. We'll make them quick. We're
Okay.
running out of time, so there probably should be a book at some point.
It will not be.
If we continue on this trajectory, where are we in the next 10, 20 years?
Oh, I don't like that question at all. I do think that our political rancor gets worse in the short term. There's not anything successfully working to stop it or break it up, right? Some of us have tried. Again, I'm not sure that the experiments have gone exactly to plan, but there's not a recipe that appears to be working right now. So I do think things will get more difficult. One thing that I'm actually concerned about that I don't see anyone really talking about or thinking about much, I know that you're probably thinking about it since you do the democracy beat for WAPO, but I'm concerned about what happens in November after the election. Regardless of which candidate wins, I believe there will be a swell of movement by either extreme to seek to invalidate or degrade or denigrate the outcome of the election. I think we should prepare for that. I'm concerned about that.
Okay, so you have said that you do not intend on engaging politically in the 2024 election.
Oh, I don't think that would be helpful for any candidate.
But you are.
I think they'd all be like, no thanks, Kirsten.
But you spell out the potential dangers.
Yes, but I have been doing that for 20 years.
That is true.
That's right.
But why not get involved? Why not, maybe not candidate specific, but on a different level?
I said this in my announcement when I decided to retire. The American public is not interested in what I'm selling right now.
Final question for you. If you could offer your successor, no matter who that may be, a piece of advice, a piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Just one?
You could, please.
I have a menu. Don't promise things you can't deliver. Candidates up and down the ballot, from the very highest to the very lowest, continue to promise things they can't deliver. That leads young people in particular to feel disaffected and disappointed and disillusioned. And that exacerbates the division that is occurring in our country. So don't promise that which you know is not true. Are they coming to? Oh! Another piece of advice that I would offer, this makes me so happy. I love this man. Another piece of advice that I would offer is to become true friends with every single member of the United States Senate. Make true, meaningful, personal relationships, not based on politics or ideology, but personal relationships. Because when you have a personal relationship with someone, they will do what you ask 10 or 100 or 1,000 times more, even if they don't agree with you politically. That's a secret of successes that I can't even list out today. There's so many of them that have come solely because of my personal friendships with other senators. And then the third piece of advice that I would give is just be quite different than what you're campaigning as. Because candidates who campaign as righteous warriors for the edges of the political spectrum will not be productive in getting outcomes for the state of Arizona. Period. Because, as I said to you earlier, excuse my language, this shit works. Like, working together, forming relationships, compromising, it works. And our state has been the recipient of more benefit from the senators who, not just me, but those who served before me, because all of us were willing to work across the aisle and get things done. Our state deserves to have that. We deserve to keep it.
Senator, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Don't go yet. Don't go yet. Just stay there. So I got to know your senator by virtue of the last few years we've spent together, and there are a few things I want to underscore. I think you probably have heard them and perhaps got a sense of them here. One is that you've heard very clearly from Yvonne, which is that Senator Sinema is highly effective in getting legislation passed that affects our lives. Mitch McConnell said she is the most effective senator in the United States Senate. Right? That's Mitch McConnell on the other side of the aisle, who said she is the most effective. And we've worked together on a number of bipartisan bills. She was the power behind them. She was the lead. There was a Republican that paired with her, but she was the one that drove it. It was extraordinary. That's number one. We're going to miss her a lot in that regard. Number two, she, by virtue of intelligence, personality, energy, and a willingness to dig in, she's been able to get people to work together, even on things that are not related to those big pieces of legislation. And before I left last week, I was sitting next to my colleagues in the back row of the Senate, and it was Senator Bill Cassidy on one side and Tom Tillis on the other.
Wonderful. Both wonderful.
And we were talking about how is this place going to work without Kyrsten Sinema? And you might think, well, that's kind of... No, she is the... When there are impasses, and there are often impasses, she goes back and forth. And I have to tell you, there's some people in my own party that I find distasteful. I
love them.
She loves them.
I love them.
She loves them.
I know who she's talking about. They are great.
She loves them, and she's able to get them to do things I would never be able to get them to do because they can tell I don't like them. All right? and she does. And so she's highly effective. I'll mention one more thing. So we will miss her, and the country will miss her a lot. We really do wonder, how's it going to work? The third thing is this, which is, why did she become so toxic to the base of the Democrat Party? All right? What was it? What was the point when that really came home? And that was on the so-called filibuster rule, okay? And by the way, the term filibuster is a terrible misnomer. That's not really no one filibusters anymore. It's the 60-vote rule, meaning to pass the Senate requires Republicans and Democrats to agree. You have to compromise to get something into law. Kyrsten Sinema felt that was important. Interestingly, all of her colleagues, I think all but maybe one or two of her colleagues, several years ago,
33. There's 33 of them.
33 Democrat senators. Several years ago, when Republicans had the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, all three, the Democrats realized if we got rid of the 60-vote rule, we Republicans could do anything. And Donald Trump was saying, I want to do all these things. I'm going to get rid of all the unions in the public sphere and so forth. And these 30 Democrats, 33?
33.
33. These 33 Democrats, she's better at numbers than I am. These 33 Democrats signed a letter to Mitch McConnell saying, do not get rid of that rule. It is absolutely essential to the preservation of democracy to make sure that we compromise. And guess what? When the time came, when the Democrats had the House and the Senate and the White House, every single person who'd signed it on the Democratic side decided to vote to get rid of the 60-vote rule. Every one of them. And who was it that took the blame for saying no? What's extraordinary to me is that there was not a hue and cry by the Democratic Party to say, wait a second, this person has integrity. And the other 33, where the heck are they? But instead they went after her. It speaks volumes about the divisiveness in our country. Now, I don't know what the answer is to the divisiveness that occurs. I've got some thoughts. I'd like to hear yours, Kyrsten, which is what can't be? People talk about, well, we're going to start a new party. It's not going to work. Then there are all these groups. There's Forward, and there's No Labels, and there are all these different things. They don't seem to work. Do you have any prospects, any thoughts about what we do to chart, again, a middle course?
First of all, thank you.
By the way, can we give her a round of applause? This woman is amazing.
Thank you, Mitt. Just so you know, I think that was the most important vote I ever took in my entire 20 years. The filibuster vote, I do believe, is the most important vote I ever took, and I don't regret it at all. If I had to do it over again, I would do exactly the same. Thank you. I don't know that I think this, again, goes back to the beginning, like the early question. We're in a cultural fever. I think it is incumbent on us as Americans to temper our own id, right? folks who have a psychology background will know I talk about this a lot. There's the id, the ego, and the superego. And the id is like the little, short, kind of small, selfish part of you that does exactly what you want in the moment. It's the person who eats 3 pieces of cake, even though you know you're going to get sick, right? The ego is the part that is worried about what other people will think. That's the person who just has 1 piece of cake because they're worried about looking greedy in front of others. The superego is the self that is willing to sacrifice for the greater good and do that which matters for the common good. The superego is the steward of our country, right? We're in an id place right now, right? Where everything is short-term, what feels good emotionally right now. That's why elected officials and those running for office are lying and promising things that are just not possible or true. And there's a few people who behave in the ego. Very few superego, right? Very, very few. So culturally, I think that we as Americans have to just shift back. You don't have to go to the superego. That's hard, I understand. But the ego, the one where you at least think about long term, about is this good for me today and in 5 years? Is this good for my neighbor? Like, how will this be perceived in the world? We've got to shift back to this place of thinking more than just the short-term personal victory, and think about the impact of our desires, our behaviors, and our actions, not just on ourselves, but on our communities. How does our behavior impact others? Are we thinking about tomorrow, or the next day, or 10 years from now? And if we as a culture can begin to do that, that's how we can tolerate difference of opinion, embrace the idea that someone else might have an opinion different than your own. And crazy, I know, but that they actually might have a better idea than yours, and that you could learn and change or grow from it. Like, that's part of the human experience, right? This is what we all teach our children, I hope. But in our politics, we're not doing that. And so I think it's incumbent on us as Americans to do that.
Thank you so much.
That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.